Before we get into the timber, turf and firecraft that kept Norse communities alive through Scandinavian winters, take a moment to subscribe and share Iron Age instincts if you value serious, practical history. This channel exists for people who care about how things actually worked, how structures were engineered, how fuel was rationed, how human bodies endured the cold. Viking survival in winter wasn't luck, and it wasn't myth. It was the result of deliberate architectural design, disciplined fuel management, layered clothing systems, and social organization that treated winter as a predictable campaign rather than a seasonal inconvenience. If you want to understand how entire villages stayed habitable in months of darkness and sub-zero temperatures, stay with me. The longhouse was a thermal machine disguised as a home. The Viking longhouse was not just shelter, it was a controlled climate system built with an intuitive grasp of insulation and airflow. Walls were constructed using timber frames packed with wattle and daub, or, in harsher regions, thick layers of turf. Turf blocks, cut from sod and stacked like bricks, contained trapped air and dense organic matter that acted as natural insulation. Roofs were layered with birch bark and more turf, forming a thick cap that retained heat while shedding snow. The structure was long and narrow for a reason. A central hearth ran down the middle, radiating heat evenly through the building. Heat rises, and the peaked roof allowed smoke to gather high before venting through a smoke hole or louver. This retained warmth at human level while allowing controlled ventilation. If you want to apply this principle in a modern survival scenario, focus on insulation before heat production. A small, well-insulated shelter requires far less fuel than a large, poorly sealed one. Even in a temporary camp, stacking earth, snow or sod around walls can dramatically reduce heat loss. The Vikings invested labour up front so they wouldn't bleed fuel all winter. Fire management was disciplined and continuous, not wasteful. Fuel scarcity in winter could be fatal. Vikings did not simply burn large fires, they maintained steady, controlled hearths. Wood was seasoned months in advance, stored under cover, and rationed carefully. In treeless areas like Iceland, driftwood and dried animal dung supplemented limited timber supplies. The central hearth was rarely extinguished. Coals were banked overnight under ash to preserve embers. This reduced the need for relighting fires from scratch and conserved tinder and kindling. The fire was not just warmth, it was cooking, light, tool maintenance, and social cohesion in one. So, in practical terms, survivalists today should really think in terms of heat retention rather than simply heat intensity. Banking coals, using hardwoods for longer burn times, and minimizing drafts around the hearth can, well, actually double the efficiency of your fuel. Winter survival, is really an equation of stored calories and stored wood. The Vikings, they understood both variables quite well. Animals were in fact integrated into the winter heat strategy. In many longhouses, livestock shared the same structure, often at one end separated by a partition. This was not convenience alone, it was thermodynamics. Large animals produce substantial body heat, and housing them within the insulated structure created a shared thermal envelope. Manure was also a resource. Dry dung could supplement fuel supplies, especially in areas with limited woodland. Nothing was wasted. For modern application, consider how even small heat sources add up in enclosed spaces. In off-grid living or emergency conditions, clustering sleeping areas, storing water indoors, and reducing unused space can help retain heat. The Viking model reminds us that survival systems work best when biological and structural elements are integrated rather than separated. Clothing was, a layered defence system engineered for function. Archaeological finds show wool, linen and animal furs layered strategically. Wool, interestingly enough, retains insulating properties even when damp, making it ideal for snowy climates. Undergarments of linen wicked moisture away from the skin, while outer layers of wool and fur trapped air. Cloaks fastened with brooches were not decorative luxuries. They were, in fact, adjustable insulation. Hoods and mittens were common, and leg wrappings added warmth without restricting movement. For those studying winter survival today, the lesson is clear. Insulation must be layered and moisture managed. Cotton kills in cold conditions because it retains moisture and loses insulating value. The Vikings relied on materials that maintained warmth under variable conditions. Replicating this, it means choosing wool or modern synthetics with similar properties and always prioritizing dry layers. Food storage and caloric planning made winter survivable. Warmth alone does not sustain life. Viking winter survival depended on caloric reserves. Summer and autumn were devoted to drying fish, salting meat, fermenting vegetables, and storing grains. Root cellars and storage pits kept food from freezing solid while preventing spoilage. High-fat diets were common in winter. Fat is calorie-dense and essential for maintaining body heat. Dairy products, preserved meats and fish provided steady energy during months when hunting and farming were limited. If you are applying this knowledge, understand that cold environments dramatically increase caloric needs. Planning for winter means storing more energy than you think you need. Preservation techniques such as drying, salting and fermenting remain viable without modern refrigeration. The Viking model emphasizes redundancy in food supply. No single source was relied upon exclusively. Community structure reinforced resilience. Winter was endured collectively. Multiple families might share a longhouse. Labour was divided. Some tended animals, others maintained fires, repaired tools, or processed stored foods. Storytelling and craftwork were not idle pastimes. They preserved morale and productivity during long nights. Isolation kills efficiency. The Viking approach really reduced individual energy expenditure by pooling resources and skills. In any modern survival context, cooperation multiplies resilience. Shared fuel storage, communal cooking, and task specialization reduce waste and increase stability. Environmental adaptation was precise and local. Viking settlements were positioned strategically. They chose sites with access to timber, fresh water, and natural windbreaks. Buildings were often oriented to minimize exposure to prevailing winds. In some regions, structures were partially dug into the earth, using the ground's stable temperature as insulation. If you are building or selecting a winter shelter today, site choice is as critical as construction quality. Even a modest structure gains efficiency when shielded from wind and anchored into terrain that moderates temperature. Viking Survival In Winter, why their villages remained warm against all odds was not about brute endurance. It was about engineering, foresight, and disciplined resource management. They treated winter as a logistical challenge, not an unpredictable disaster. Every wall thickness, every cord of wood, every preserved fish reflected a long-term survival calculus. If this kind of deep, practical history matters to you, subscribe to Iron Age Instincts and share this with someone who takes the past seriously. The more we study how our ancestors engineered survival, the better equipped we are to face any winter, literal or otherwise.